My name is Lucas Morgan. I'm 36 now, but this happened back in the summer of 2018. I was 29 then. At the time, I had just gone through a breakup that tore me apart. I had been living in Flagstaff, Arizona, for 5 years, working freelance on outdoor gear reviews and survival blogs. After the breakup, I didn't want to be around anyone. I just needed to get out, go somewhere far from town, and clear my head. So, I packed up my Tacoma with my gear and drove northeast toward the Navajo Nation, though not all the way onto it. I ended up staying in an old cabin I found online. Some guy was renting it out cheap on a forum I was part of. It was off any main roads, about 30 miles past a tiny town called Rough Creek, Arizona, which is basically just a gas station, a diner, and some scattered houses. The guy who rented it to me only gave me GPS coordinates. He didn't want to be contacted again, just said to leave the key under the rock by the steps when I was done. I wasn't spooked by the weird setup. A lot of old-timers in the Southwest do things like that, off-the-grid types. But one thing he mentioned in the email stuck with me. Locals say skinwalkers roam those hills. Don't stay out late. At the time, I thought it was just a local legend, something to keep city folks from wandering too deep into the brush. I knew a little about the Navajo legends of skinwalkers, shapeshifters that wear the skin of animals to move unseen. I didn't believe in that stuff, but I respected it. Still, I was going out there for peace, not ghost stories. The road to the cabin turned into nothing more than 2 ruts in the dirt. I followed the GPS slowly, tires crunching over rock and dust. After about an hour of bumping through scrub and thorny mesquite, I came to the clearing. The cabin sat in the middle of tall yellow grass and scattered juniper. It looked like it hadn't been touched in years. The wood was cracked and sun-faded. The porch sagged a little. No power lines, no cell signal. Perfect. The first thing I did after unlocking the door was sweep out the inside. Dust lay thick on the floor and counters. A dead mouse was curled in the corner by the old fireplace. I got the little place cleaned up, opened the windows to air it out, then unloaded my gear, basic food supplies, a cot, my camp stove, rifle, a backup pistol, lanterns, and a solar charger. I planned to stay about 2 weeks, just hiking, writing, cooking simple meals, and keeping to myself. The first few days went by fine. Hot during the day, cold at night. I made short hikes during the early mornings, then came back and wrote notes for future articles. I'd lie on the porch at sunset with a can of chili or beans and just listen to the silence. It was peaceful like I'd hoped, but the weirdness started around day 4. That night, I was sitting on the porch in my camp chair, drinking some instant coffee, when I heard something moving out in the tall grass. At first I thought it was a deer. There were plenty of tracks around, but this sounded different. Not 4 legs, 2, heavy, slow. I stood up quietly and scanned the field. Couldn't see much. The moon was thin, and I hadn't brought my headlamp out. Whatever it was moved off before I could get a look. I brushed it off. Maybe just a stray cow, or maybe I was hearing things. The next morning, I found footprints near the edge of the grass. Human ones, bare feet.
Nos shoes.
And they were small, almost childlike, but too wide to be a kid's. The toes looked thick and spaced strange, like someone who'd never worn shoes in their life. I followed the trail a bit, but it vanished into hard-packed dirt. Later that day, I heard a rustling outside while I was eating lunch inside the cabin. When I stepped out, I found a dead jackrabbit on the porch. Its neck was twisted sharply, and its eyes were missing. There was no blood, just bone and fur and that awful stiff neck. I didn't have a dog. No other cabins were near me for miles. I had no clue how it got there. I got uneasy after that. That night, I kept the lantern burning and my rifle close. Around 2 a.m., I heard something scrape against the back wall of the cabin, just once, like a single drag of claws or maybe fingers along the wood. I stayed still in my cot, listening. The scrape didn't come again. But I didn't sleep much after that. Over the next few days, I kept seeing signs that someone, or something, was moving near the cabin. More of those strange bare footprints. Once, I saw a shadow move between two trees near the treeline. It was quick, human-shaped, but I couldn't tell much more. Around day 9, things escalated. I had gone out early in the morning trying to track a group of mule deer I had seen a few days before. I was maybe 2 miles out when I realized I hadn't marked my return trail well enough. The landscape all started to look the same, dull green scrub and reddish dirt. I used the sun and some natural markers to work my way back, but it took longer than I thought. I didn't get back to the cabin until just after sunset. When I got there, I saw that the door was open. I always latched it, even if I was just stepping out to pee. I approached slowly, rifle in hand, heart pounding. Inside, everything looked normal, but my food bin had been opened. A few cans were missing. One was left on the floor, unopened, with fresh dirt smeared on it. And the weirdest part, my solar charger was gone. The whole unit, like someone had unplugged it and taken it. Now I was sure someone was out there. I spent the next 2 days completely on edge. I barely left the cabin. When I did, it was just to step outside and relieve myself. I kept the rifle with me at all times. I checked for signs around the cabin but found nothing new. On the 3rd night after the charger went missing, I saw someone. I was lying in my cot, staring at the ceiling, when I saw a shape move past the window. It was fast, low. I jumped up, grabbed the rifle, and stepped out. At first, I didn't see anything, but then, maybe 30 yards away near the edge of the trees, I saw a figure crouched down. It was naked, pale. His arms looked long, too long. The head was turned away, but I could see its back, thin and bony. It didn't run when I shined my flashlight. It just ducked low and crawled off into the brush on all fours. I didn't shoot, couldn't. I was too stunned. The thing I saw that night was human, but barely. It didn't look like someone lost or sick. It looked like someone who had been out in the wilderness too long. Someone feral. That night, I barely slept. I locked the door with a chain I had in my truck and blocked it with a heavy chair. In the morning, I packed my gear and decided to leave early. I had planned for 2 weeks, but I was done. Whatever was out there wasn't a ghost or a monster. It was real, and I didn't want to know more. But before I could leave, I realized something else had happened. The tires on my truck were slashed. Not popped, slashed. 3 deep cuts in each rear tire. Done with a blade. I checked all my tools. My knife and hatchet were still there. So whoever did this brought their own. I was stuck. No cell signal.
Nos pertires.
My only option was to hike to Rough Creek. A long walk, but doable. I gathered supplies, water, jerky, a flare gun, flashlight, and rifle, and started walking just after noon. I stuck to the dirt road, keeping an eye out in every direction. Every sound made me jump. I didn't see anything for hours. But then, close to sunset, maybe 5 or 6 miles into the hike, I heard something behind me, a soft thump, then another. I turned fast. First, I saw nothing. Then I caught a glimpse of a figure slipping behind a boulder. I shouted, even though I knew no one would answer. I waited a minute, then kept walking, faster now. But the footsteps started again, always behind me, never close. Like whoever was following me wanted me to know they were there, but didn't want to be seen. That night, I camped in the open under the stars, rifle in hand. I didn't build a fire. I didn't sleep. The next morning, I kept moving. Around mid-afternoon, I saw the gas station in Rough Creek. I must have looked like hell, dirty, sunburned, eyes wide. The attendant gave me a weird look, but I didn't stop to explain. I used the payphone to call a tow and waited inside with the cold air blowing down on me. Later, when I told the local sheriff what happened, he nodded slowly and just said, A lot of strange folks live out there. When I mentioned the word skinwalker, he shook his head. People blame things they don't understand. What you saw, probably just some tweakers living off the grid. It happens. But I knew it wasn't that simple. What I saw wasn't a drug addict or a homeless guy. It was someone who had given up being human. Someone who'd lived out there so long they'd stopped using language, tools, clothes, maybe even thought. I didn't go back for my truck. The tow service picked it up a few days later and brought it back to Flagstaff. I sold it a month later. I never wrote about what happened in any blog or post. I never talked to the guy who rented me the cabin again. But I still think about it sometimes, especially when I'm alone in the woods. I don't believe in skinwalkers the way the legends describe them, but I believe in something else. People who've disappeared into the wild and lost their minds. People who've become something other than people. Not ghosts, not monsters, just someone who stopped being human a long time ago. And that's worse. I hadn't seen her in 5 years. After the divorce, we barely spoke. There were a few emails about taxes, one letter about a storage unit she wanted me to clear out, and a Christmas card the first year. Then silence. When I heard she passed, it came from a mutual friend I hadn't spoken to in forever. I wasn't invited to the funeral. Didn't expect to be. I still drove out there, sat in my truck on the hill above the cemetery, and watched from a distance. Didn't cry, didn't go down. Just sat in the cab of my truck with the engine off, staring through the windshield at a row of people in black coats standing around a hole in the ground. She was 37, cancer, quick, 6 months from diagnosis to gone. She had a cabin up in northern Washington, not far from the Idaho border, in a part of the forest that stayed green all year. Her family didn't want it, said I could have it if I wanted. I didn't answer right away, let the message sit in my inbox a week. Then another. Then I called the number her brother left, and 2 days later he mailed me the key. Took me a full month to convince myself to go. I packed light, just a duffel bag, a couple days of food, and some tools in case the place needed work. The last time I'd seen the cabin was back in 2018. She and I had gone up for her birthday. That was long before the split, back when things still felt good, or at least not yet broken. I left Spokane early, hoping to reach the cabin before dark. The drive was long, around 6 hours with a stop for gas and snacks. By the time I turned off the paved road onto that old gravel path through the woods, the sun had already dropped behind the trees. The light went from gold to gray in less than 10 minutes, and by the time I saw the old wooden post that marked the cabin turnoff, I had to flick on my high beams. The road hadn't been maintained in years. Bushes and wet branches clawed at the sides of my truck, and I had to drive slow to keep from getting stuck. The rain had started a few miles back, light, cold drops tapping the windshield, and now it was coming down steady. My wipers dragged across the glass, smeared the water more than cleared it. I saw the cabin through the trees like a shape in the fog. Still standing, still the same dull brown with a green tin roof. No power, no driveway, just a clearing in the woods surrounded by trees so thick you couldn't see 100 feet in any direction. I parked close and left the engine running while I unlocked the door. The key stuck a bit, but I forced it. The hinges moaned when I pushed it open, and a wave of cold, damp air hit me in the face. Inside, it smelled like old wood, mold, and dust. Everything was still there. Her things, her old books, that wool blanket she used to drape over the couch. The place was quiet, not silent. There was the steady tapping of rain on the roof, the occasional creak from the beams overhead. But that heavy quiet you only get deep in the woods, when you're truly alone. I walked through the rooms one by one. Living room, kitchen, bedroom. A small bathroom with no running water. The power had been off for years. The place had a propane heater, but I wasn't sure if the tank outside was still full. I spent the first hour just cleaning, swept out dead leaves, wiped the counters, made sure the door and windows could still shut. Then I lit a few candles, changed into dry clothes, and made some canned soup on the old portable stove she'd kept under the sink. I ate it sitting on the floor, staring at the fireplace. I didn't try to light it. The chimney was probably clogged. It was fully dark now, rain still steady, wind starting to pick up. I hadn't seen a single person or car since I left the highway. Just trees. Thousands of trees. The first night was rough. I slept on the couch. Didn't bring bedding, so I used that old wool blanket and rolled up a jacket for a pillow. The rain got louder around midnight. Wind started knocking branches against the roof. At one point, I swear I heard something thud against the side of the cabin. Something heavy. But when I checked, there was nothing there. Just wet wood and pine needles. I barely slept. Woke up every hour to some new sound. Next morning, I stepped outside. The rain had stopped, but the woods were soaked. Fog hung low through the trees. The ground squished under my boots. I walked around the back of the cabin to check the propane tank. Empty. No chance of heat unless I built a fire, and I wasn't sure the chimney was safe. I spent the day cleaning more. Found an old toolbox in the back closet. Oiled the hinges on the windows. Patched a leak in the roof using some tape and a tarp I brought. Around mid-afternoon, I went for a walk along the old trail behind the cabin. It was a deer trail, mostly. Narrow, overgrown. I followed it maybe a quarter mile in before it vanished into thicker brush. I stood there for a while, just listening. You don't realize how loud silence can be until you're alone in the woods. Every crack, every snap of a twig sounds huge. I headed back and made dinner, more canned food, and sat on the steps watching the last of the daylight fade. No signal, no radio, just trees. That night I heard it again. I was laying there on the couch, not quite asleep, when I heard something walking outside. Slow steps, not an animal, too heavy, crunching through the wet needles, pacing along the wall. I held my breath and listened. It circled the cabin once. I didn't move, just stared at the ceiling, heart pounding. Then it was gone. Next morning, I checked outside.
No prints.
Just mud. I started thinking maybe it was a branch falling, a deer, a trick of the wind, but something didn't feel right. Something was off. That day, I decided to hike deeper into the woods. I wanted to clear my head, get some space from the cabin. I followed that same trail again, farther this time, past the overgrowth. I pushed through thick brush, climbed over logs, and after about a half hour, I found something. An old shed. I swear I'd never seen it before, not even back when my ex and I used to come up here. It was half collapsed, roof buckled, one side completely rotted. I walked around it slowly, looking for signs it had ever been used. No lock on the door, but the hinges were rusted shut. I pried it open with a branch. Inside, it smelled like mold and damp earth. There were tools scattered on the floor. Old rusted axes, a broken rake, something that looked like a shovel with the handle snapped in half. And in the corner, a pile of clothes. Men's clothes. Wet, muddy, ripped in places. I didn't stay long. I made it back to the cabin before dark and locked the door behind me. My hands were shaking. I didn't eat, just sat by the window, staring into the trees, waiting for something to move. That night, it came back. Same footsteps, same pacing, only this time it stopped by the back wall. I heard something scrape like metal on wood. Then it was quiet. I stayed awake until morning. When the sun finally came up, I went outside. There were marks on the cabin wall, scratches, deep gouges in the wood near the back window, like something had dragged a knife along the wall or maybe a claw, but I didn't want to think about that. There were no prints again, no sign of anything. I told myself I was done. I pack up, drive back to Spokane, and never return. I went inside, grabbed my duffel, and started stuffing clothes back in. That's when I noticed something was missing. The picture. There was an old photo of my ex-wife on the mantle, the one where she's sitting on the steps of the cabin, smiling, holding a coffee mug. It was gone. The frame was still there, but the photo was gone. I searched the floor, the table, under the couch. Nothing. I grabbed my bag and left. The drive out felt longer than it should have. Every turn looked the same. Trees, more trees. Halfway down the gravel road, I had to stop. Someone had dragged a fallen log across the path. I got out. Rain had started again, light but cold. I tried pushing the log, but it was too heavy. Ended up using a rope and the truck to drag it aside. Took nearly 20 minutes. When I finally reached the main road, I didn't stop, didn't look back, just drove. That was 2 months ago. I haven't been back since. Haven't told anyone what I saw. Sometimes I wonder if it was just my mind playing tricks on me. Grief, stress, bad sleep. But sometimes late at night I think about those footsteps, the scratched wall, the missing photo, and I wonder what's still out there in those woods. I still have the key, still have the papers. The cabin is mine now, but I won't go back. Not again. Not after what I heard. Not after what I found. Some places should be left alone. Some memories too. And whatever she had up there in that cabin, I think it should have died with her. I took a seasonal job as a park ranger back in the summer of 2019, a few months after I turned 31. I'd just gotten out of a weird stretch in my life. My dad passed away the year before, and everything back home in Ohio started to feel too heavy. I wasn't married, didn't have kids, didn't have anything tying me to the place anymore. So when I saw a listing online for a ranger post out west, near central Idaho, I applied without thinking much. They needed someone to live alone in one of the satellite cabins near the edge of the forest boundary. Just routine patrols, light paperwork, some trail maintenance. The isolation actually appealed to me. I thought it'd clear my head. I drove out in a dusty gray Tacoma, got there in early May. The cabin was up a long dirt road called Hayfork Ridge, about 16 miles from the main ranger station. The structure was old, probably built in the 60s, but it was solid, basic. A narrow porch out front, propane stove inside, a cot, wood stove, and a desk with a little radio set that crackled more than it talked. No cell signal. Closest paved road was 10 miles off. I had a couple of maps, a compass, a knife, bear spray, and a government-issued .357 revolver locked in the supply case. First couple weeks went fine. There were occasional hikers that came through the marked trails, and I did my job. Cleared out deadfall, logged trail use, made reports. I kept a notebook, wrote down the weather every morning, jotted down any activity, broken branches, campsites, signs of animals. I was taught to always keep logs. They told me it was important. I got used to the quiet. The way the wind came in slow and heavy in the afternoons. The sound of the trees groaning like old floorboards at night. I kept a routine. Up at 6, hike a few trails, scan the forest edges with binoculars, back to the cabin before dark. Then came June. It was June 9th when I first felt something was off. I was clearing debris off a side trail that hadn't been used much in years. My map had it marked as Trail 117, though half the markers were gone or fallen. I walked maybe 3 miles up it when I noticed the forest started to feel wrong. I know how that sounds, but something about the air felt thicker, heavier. Less birdsong, more stillness. I remember stopping and turning in a slow circle. The woods were the same. Nothing moved, but I felt like I was being watched. I told myself it was just nerves. Maybe a cougar in the area. Could have been anything. I backed out, headed back down, but I made a note of it in my log that night. June 9th, trail 117, 3 miles in. Area felt heavy. No sound. Weird atmosphere. Will return in 2 days. Recheck. 2 days later, I went back, but I didn't make it more than a mile up before I found something that made my stomach twist. Someone or something had stuck a dead deer head on a stick right in the middle of the trail. Fresh, still bleeding a little. The stick was maybe 4 feet tall, stabbed into the dirt like a warning. I didn't see any other parts of the animal, just the head, flies all around it. I didn't stay long. I took one photo with my point-and-shoot camera, hiked back, and logged it. Called it in over the radio, too. Got nothing but static back. That wasn't unusual. Reception was garbage unless I climbed the Fire Watch Hill, which was 2 miles uphill behind the cabin. I made another log entry. June 11th, deer head on stick. Trail 117. Approximate. 1.2 miles in. Fresh. No signs of predator. Returned to cabin. Will follow up if instructed. I didn't get a follow-up. I didn't press the issue. That night, I barely slept. The wind felt louder. I kept hearing thumps on the side of the cabin. Not constant, just once or twice. I grabbed the revolver, checked the windows. Nothing. Could have been a tree branch, but I couldn't find one near enough to touch the walls. 2 days passed. I didn't go back to Trail 117. Something told me not to. On June 14th, I went to check the firewood pile behind the cabin, and that's when I noticed something that really rattled me. A boot print. Not mine. It was deeper, wider, and facing the back wall of the cabin. One single print in the soft dirt, as if someone had stood there, watching the back window. I walked a wide circle around the cabin, checked for more prints, but that was the only one. I started carrying the revolver with me at all times after that. I reported it in my daily log and again tried the radio that evening. Still nothing. June 14th, boot print behind cabin. Not mine. Facing window. No other prints. No signs of vehicle or approach. Stayed alert all day. That night, I didn't sleep. I sat up in the chair by the wood stove, revolver on my lap, listening. Around 2:30 a.m., I heard what sounded like heavy steps on the porch. Then they stopped. I held my breath and stared at the door.
Nonak.
No voice, just silence. After a while, I cracked the door and pointed my flashlight. Nothing there, but I could see it again. One new boot print in the dust, right by the front step. I stayed locked in that cabin till sunrise. I started hiking out to the Fire Lookout Hill every morning after that, radioing in the reports. They told me to log everything but didn't send anyone. Said it was probably a poacher or local hermit. It happens, they said, but the next few days it got worse. June 17th, I woke up and found the cabin door slightly open. I know I locked it. I triple-checked it every night after the boot print. I slept with the revolver under my cot. Nothing was missing, but the coffee can I kept on the counter was on the floor. No animals could have done that without breaking a window. I started boarding the windows every night after that. Cut up a few old planks, nailed them from inside. By the end of June, I wasn't sleeping more than 2 hours a night. I was down to one hot meal a day. I stopped hiking the trails. I stayed close to the cabin, mostly chopping wood or pretending to write logs while listening for footsteps. I'd hear things in the woods, twigs snapping, low coughing sounds, like someone clearing their throat behind the tree line. But I never saw anyone. One morning, I found the deer head from before. Same size, same antlers, lying in front of my cabin porch. It was rotting by then, covered in maggots. I gagged just smelling it. I dumped it down a ravine and burned my gloves. That was the last straw. I climbed the Fire Lookout Hill, took the radio and told them I was done. I'd stay until the next scheduled supply drop, July 2nd, but after that I was out. They agreed, said they'd process my leave form, Told me not to engage with anyone I saw, just to log everything. Typical government advice. So I waited. I marked off days on the back of the cabin door with a charcoal pencil. 1 slash per day. On July 1st, the night before the supply drop, I sat up late again, sipping instant coffee and staring at the map. I had every trail memorized by then, the whole region, but I didn't recognize what I saw on the floor next. It was a map, not mine, folded, dirty, stained. Someone had slid it under the cabin door. I stared at it for a long time before opening it. It was a hand-drawn map of the area, crude, made with pencil, but one part stood out, a section about a mile south of Trail 117, marked with a red X. Next to it, scrawled in what looked like charcoal, "Don't come back." That was it. No name, no explanation. I packed my bag and waited the rest of the night with the revolver aimed at the door. The next morning, I hiked out early to meet the supply truck. It was supposed to arrive around noon, where the dirt road met the forest line. I waited 3 hours. Nobody came. I hiked back, heart racing the entire way. When I got to the cabin, I found every one of my charcoal marks scrubbed off the inside of the door. Clean, just wood grain. My heart dropped. I hadn't been gone more than 6 hours. I didn't go back inside. I grabbed my pack and ran 16 miles down to the ranger station. Got there by dark. Told them everything. Showed them the photo of the deer head, the boot print, the map with the red X. They didn't laugh, but they didn't believe much either. I could see it in their faces. They sent a deputy up to check the cabin the next morning. He found it empty, clean, no map,
No prints.
no deer head. But he did find something I hadn't seen. Under the cabin, in the crawl space, he found dozens of cigarette butts, a pair of binoculars, and a half-buried lawn chair. Someone had been living under the cabin, watching me. I left the next day. I never worked as a ranger again. I moved back east. Took a job doing inventory for a warehouse in Indiana. I don't go camping anymore. I don't walk in forests. Sometimes, when I close my eyes at night, I still see the deer head on the trail. And I wonder how long he'd been watching me, how close he got while I slept. If I'd stayed one more night, I'm almost certain he would have come inside. It was late September of 2019, and I had taken a week off from my job at the automotive shop in Reading, Pennsylvania. I was 32 at the time, unmarried, no kids, no pets, just me. I started getting this gnawing feeling in my chest, like everything around me had gotten stale. Same roads, same buildings, same faces, every damn day. So, when my buddy Marcus gave me the key to his family's old hunting cabin out in West Virginia and told me I could use it whenever I needed to disappear for a bit, I didn't even hesitate. I took him up on it the next day. The drive out was long, almost 6 hours through rural back roads and patches of thick trees that got taller the deeper into the mountains I went. The last leg of the trip took me off paved roads completely and onto a muddy, winding path full of switchbacks and washed-out ditches. My truck's suspension took a beating, and I started questioning whether a break from routine was worth this level of isolation. By the time I got to the cabin, the sun was just beginning to dip behind the hills. The place was small, just one room and a loft with a slanted metal roof and a rotted wooden porch that creaked under my boots. It sat on a hill above a dried-up creek bed, surrounded by pine trees so tall they made you feel like an ant when you looked up. There was no cell service, no power, just a propane tank for the stove and a rust-streaked water tank that caught rain from the roof. I spent that first night just unpacking, lighting some candles, and testing out the little propane heater Marcus said would mostly work. It sputtered to life with a faint hiss and a little blue flame, and I settled in on the old twin mattress tucked against the corner. The place smelled like dust, mold, and pine. I didn't mind it. It was quiet, really quiet, like the kind of quiet that presses against your ears until your own heartbeat starts to sound too loud. The next morning, I woke up to a gray sky and that strange stillness you only get in deep woods. I boiled some water for instant coffee, grabbed my jacket, and decided to walk the hill behind the cabin. There was supposed to be an old deer blind up there somewhere that Marcus's grandfather built in the 70s. I thought I'd check it out just to give myself something to do. The path behind the cabin wasn't really a path at all, just a faint trail in the leaves that wound up the slope. The climb wasn't too steep, but it was slow going. Everything was damp, and some of the rocks shifted under my boots. I took my time, pausing now and then to listen. The forest out there had this heavy kind of silence. No bird calls, no squirrel chatter, just wind through trees. Every now and then I'd hear a sharp crack somewhere off in the distance, probably branches falling, but each time, it made my stomach knot up for a second before I told myself to get a grip. It took me maybe 20 minutes to reach the top of the ridge. That's when I saw it. About 30 feet off to the right, half hidden behind a wall of briars, was a small, sun-bleached structure. The deer blind, or at least what was left of it. It looked more like a shack than anything else, maybe 6 by 6 feet, with one broken window and a sagging roof. The door hung crooked on one hinge. I figured I'd poke around and then head back for lunch. I stepped inside. The smell hit me first. Rotten, sharp, like meat left out in the sun for days. But underneath it was something else. This coppery, almost metallic scent that made me instinctively cover my nose with the inside of my elbow. The place was mostly empty except for a stack of old plastic chairs, a mildewed sleeping bag in the corner, and a small wooden crate near the far wall. I squatted down, curious about the crate. It was half covered by a tarp. When I pulled the tarp back, I saw a mess of flies scatter. Inside the crate was a dead body. I fell back so hard I cracked my elbow on the floor behind me, but I barely felt it. My whole body seized up with panic. I couldn't even scream, couldn't look away. It was a man, maybe late 40s, early 50s, face sunken and half blackened. His skin was gray, stretched too tight over his cheekbones. The eyes were gone, not closed, gone, empty sockets. His clothes looked like hiking gear, but the fabric was torn in weird places. Arms and chest were covered in dark stains, and his hands were clenched into fists, frozen stiff. I couldn't tell how long he'd been there. Judging by the smell and the condition, maybe a couple of weeks. It looked like animals had started getting to him. His legs were twisted in a way that didn't look natural, one boot missing, the foot shriveled like it had dried out. The way he was stuffed in there, it wasn't an accident. Somebody had tried to hide him. My stomach turned and I scrambled outside. I threw up in the dirt beside the shack and leaned against a tree, trying to catch my breath. My hands were shaking so bad I could barely wipe the sweat off my face. I wanted to run, but something in my brain told me I had to take a closer look to try to understand what the hell I had just found. I went back inside. This time I kept my distance. There was something under the man's shoulder, a corner of paper. I didn't want to touch the body, so I used a stick to fish it out. It was a folded map, soaked with blood on one side. When I opened it, I realized it wasn't just a trail map. It was a hand-drawn one, showing parts of the valley not on any of the printed maps I had. And one spot had been circled in red ink. A little clearing down by the creek, not far from the cabin. I stayed frozen for a long while after that, just standing there with the map in one hand, breathing through my mouth so I wouldn't smell him. I knew I had to go to the police, but there was no service up there. I'd have to drive nearly an hour back down the mountain before I could make a call. And the storm clouds rolling in made me nervous. Dirt roads like that turn into rivers when it rains hard. I decided I'd head back to the cabin, pack up, and leave immediately. But I couldn't shake the image of the map. The red circle. Why had that been marked? Had the man come from there? Was he trying to get to it? Or was it where he died? I don't know what got into me, but I didn't go straight back. I followed the map. The trail to the red circle wasn't easy. It twisted through thick trees and down into the base of the valley, where everything got darker. The light barely made it through the trees. After about 30 minutes, I found the clearing. It was about the size of a basketball court, with a fire pit in the middle and what looked like old debris scattered around. Beer cans, a rusted axe head, half a canvas tent. But what stopped me cold was the smell. That same smell from the shack. It was faint, but there. I circled the area slowly, scanning the ground. And then I saw something buried in the dirt, right near the base of a rotted tree stump, just the corner of a tarp. I dug it out with a stick. Another body, wrapped tight. This one was much fresher. I didn't open the tarp completely, just enough to see pale skin and a mop of dark hair. I couldn't take any more. I dropped the stick, turned, and ran. Back at the cabin, I packed as fast as I could. The sky had gone dark, and rain was already starting to fall. The forest started to feel like it was pressing in on all sides. I ran to the truck and tore down the dirt road faster than I should have, hydroplaning in some of the deeper ruts, but I didn't care. I just needed to get out. By the time I got to the nearest ranger station, it was pitch black and raining hard. I ran inside and told them everything. I gave them the map, showed them the marks, and told them exactly what I saw. They called it in and kept me there for hours, asking questions, taking statements. I didn't leave until after sunrise. The investigation took weeks. I kept checking the news for updates. Turns out the man in the shack had been missing since August. He was a freelance travel writer from North Carolina, passing through the area for some sort of survival story. The second body in the clearing was a local man, ex-con, small-time dealer, last seen 2 weeks before I got there. The sheriff wouldn't say much, but one article mentioned that they found rope, tools, and signs that more bodies might have been buried nearby. The whole valley got shut down, roads blocked, trails closed. They never arrested anyone, at least not publicly. Just lots of silence after the initial reports. I never went back to the cabin. I gave Marcus his key back and told him to burn the damn place. He just laughed, said I was overreacting, probably saw a dead deer and freaked out. I didn't argue. I never mentioned the second body, the one in the tarp. Maybe the rangers found it, maybe they didn't. I still think about it sometimes, about what I would have found if I'd stayed in that clearing longer, about why that man had marked it on the map, and most of all, about how long it would have taken for someone to find me if I hadn't run. Because I'm almost sure, if I hadn't left when I did, whoever buried that second body might have come back to check on it. And maybe I'd be in the ground next to him by now. I was 34 that year, and I remember because it was the same summer I sold my apartment in Pittsburgh and took some time off work. It was mid-June, hot and wet like it always gets in western Pennsylvania. I'd been working non-stop for almost 10 years in the same factory, night shifts mostly, and I had finally decided to use some of the money I saved to buy a small piece of land out in the middle of nowhere. I found it through a private seller. 5 acres of wooded hillside near the Allegheny National Forest, about 3 hours northeast of Pittsburgh. There was a one-room hunting cabin already there, old but still holding together. A creek ran through the back of the property. It wasn't connected to the grid, but I liked that. I wanted quiet. I wanted space. I didn't even tell many people I bought it. I figured I'd take a month, maybe 2, and just live out there. Fix up the cabin a little, cut some trails, get away from everything. I didn't have much. A couple totes of gear, a cooler, tools, my cot, my .308 hunting rifle, and a generator I strapped in the back of my pickup. I took my dog to Cooper. He was a 5-year-old lab mix, solid black, calm, loyal, never barked unless something was really wrong. I trusted him more than I trusted most people. The road to the cabin wasn't even paved. It was a dirt path wide enough for one truck that went uphill through thick woods and got rougher the closer you got. It had rained a few days before I got there, so the drive-in was slow, ruts full of muddy water, branches brushing both sides of the truck. There was a steel gate at the base of the trail with a chain and a padlock. No signs, no address numbers, just woods all around. When I got to the top, I parked and just sat there a moment. The cabin was smaller than I remembered from the pictures. One door, one small porch, no paint left on the wood siding, a metal roof, one window on the front and two on the sides. It looked like it had been built in the 60s and never updated. I unlocked the door. The inside smelled dry and old, dust, dead bugs, wood. A cot frame sat in the corner. There was a rusted-out propane stove and an old table made of pine. The walls were bare. I brought in my things and got to work. For the first few days, it was just normal chores. I patched a few holes in the floor with scrap wood, cleaned out a wasp nest in the corner of the porch, and put mesh over the windows so bugs wouldn't get in. I cut a path down to the creek with a machete and cleared out a flat spot near it to sit. I brought in water from town in plastic containers and kept them lined along the wall. I boiled creek water on a fire if I needed more. Nights were quiet except for crickets and owls. Cooper usually laid right by the door. Sometimes he'd sleep under the table. A week went by like that, maybe more. I lost track. I had no phone service and I didn't mind. I didn't use the generator much, just at night sometimes for light and to run a fan when it got too hot to sleep. One night I was sitting on the porch just after dark, drinking a warm beer and scratching Cooper behind the ears. That was the first time I saw something that made me feel off. It wasn't much, just a flash of something red down the slope, maybe 50 yards off through the trees. I figured it was a fox or some berries or a trick of the light, but it didn't move like an animal. It was low to the ground, then it seemed to stand up. I stared at it for a while. Cooper sat up and looked that way too, ears forward, not growling, just alert. I didn't hear anything though, nothing cracking, no movement. Eventually it got dark, and I went inside, locked the door, turned on the fan, but I didn't sleep well. Every little sound outside felt louder than usual. The next morning, I walked down that slope, looking for anything. Prints, trash, a bush with red berries. Nothing. It was all normal. I convinced myself it was nothing. 3 days later, I found tire tracks in the clearing behind the cabin. Fresh ones, not from my truck. The tread was different. They curved around behind the trees and stopped near the edge of the woods. No signs of anyone. Just 2 deep tracks in the grass, and what looked like the mark of someone's boot in the soft dirt nearby. I stood there a long time just listening. Nothing, just trees and wind. I didn't hear an engine, didn't smell anything. That night I locked the door tight, loaded the rifle, and kept it leaned against the wall next to the cot. Cooper didn't bark, but he didn't sleep much either. He paced a bit and laid down facing the window. The next morning, I found something else. At the end of the trail, just before the gate, a pile of cigarette butts, half-smoked, fresh. Someone had been sitting there, watching maybe. They weren't there before. I checked the chain on the gate. It was still locked, but the whole thing could be lifted out of the ground if someone really wanted to. It was just pushed into loose dirt. I stared at it a long time. I started carrying my rifle with me anytime I went more than a few feet from the cabin. Even when I went to the creek, I stopped using the generator at night, sat in the dark, ate cold food, slept in shifts. I felt stupid for being scared, but I couldn't shake it. Then, 2 nights after I found those butts, I heard the sound of an engine. Late sometime after midnight, far off down the trail. It didn't come all the way up, just idled for a while. I I turned off my lantern and stood at the window. Cooper stood too. His body was stiff. The engine cut off after maybe 3 minutes. Then nothing. No doors. No voices. Just silence. I didn't sleep that night. The next morning, I walked all the way down the trail with the rifle slung across my chest. About halfway down, I stopped. In the ditch beside the trail, I saw it. A red gas can, like the kind you use for lawnmowers. It was half full. No markings on it. I left it and kept walking. At the gate, no sign of anyone. Just forest. When I got back to the cabin, I noticed something I hadn't before. Scratches on the doorframe. Fresh. Like someone had dragged a knife or tool across the wood. A long, thin gouge, maybe 2 feet tall. Cooper sniffed at it and backed away. That day, I packed up. I loaded the truck and decided to go into town for the night. Just to breathe, just to feel safe again. The nearest motel was 30 minutes away, a place called Hillview Inn. I checked in with no problem. I took a shower, laid on the bed, turned on the TV for the first time in weeks. At some point, I fell asleep. I dreamed about the woods. In the dream, I was back at the cabin and someone was watching me through the window. I couldn't move. I woke up in a sweat. In the morning, I got coffee from the lobby and went out to check my truck. That's when I saw it. In the bed of the truck, sitting right there, plain as day, was the red gas can. I froze. My heart started racing. I looked around. No one was nearby.
No cameras.
No staff. I backed away from the truck and went back inside. I sat on the edge of the bed and stared at the floor for a long time. Whoever had been out there followed me. They followed me all the way to town. They must have come during the night while I was asleep. I called the local sheriff's office from the motel lobby phone, told them someone was messing around on my property, following me. They said they'd send someone to check it out. I never saw them. They didn't call me back. I stayed in the motel another night, slept with the lights on. Cooper didn't sleep at all. He stood at the door most of the night. The next morning, I drove back to the cabin. I was ready to load everything and leave for good. I didn't care about the money I spent. I just wanted out. When I got there, everything looked the same. But when I opened the door, something felt wrong. The cot was flipped over. That's when I knew. Someone had been inside. I checked the windows. No glass broken. The lock on the door still worked. But someone had come in. Maybe they had a copy of the key. Maybe they picked the lock. I don't know. I grabbed everything I could and loaded it up in less than 20 minutes. Tools, containers, gear. I left some things behind: chairs, firewood, the old table. I didn't care. I locked the door on the way out, knowing it wouldn't matter. On the drive out, just before reaching the gate, I saw it again. Parked off to the side in the trees, almost hidden. A red truck. An old Ford, maybe a 90s model, dull paint, no plates. I slowed down. There was no one inside. No one near it. Just sitting there, pointed toward the trail, like it had been waiting. I didn't stop. I drove straight to the highway and didn't look back. I stayed in Pittsburgh with a friend for a few days while I figured things out. I called the sheriff again, but they didn't seem too concerned. Said they couldn't prove anything. I tried to sell the land, but no one wanted it. I ended up paying a guy to bulldoze the cabin and block off the trail. That was 5 years ago. To this day, I don't know who it was. I don't know what they wanted. Maybe they were squatters. Maybe they were just messing with me. Maybe they had been living out there longer than I knew and saw me as the intruder. All I know is someone watched me for days, close enough to leave things, follow me, enter my space, and they never once showed their face. Sometimes, when I can't sleep, I picture the red truck sitting in those woods, empty, quiet, waiting, and I think to myself, thank God I left when I did, because if I hadn't, I don't think I would have made it out. I was 36 when I decided to take a break from everything and spend some time alone in the woods. It was late September 2022, and the leaves had already started to turn in the upper parts of northern Vermont. The days were still warm, but the nights dropped low enough that you could see your breath by midnight. I was living alone in upstate New York at the time. No kids, no partner, just me and my dog, a 6-year-old mixed breed mutt named Boone. He was about 60 pounds, strong, smart, and probably the most loyal animal I'd ever had. I found the cabin listing online. It was on a piece of private land owned by a logging family who rarely used it anymore. They had built it in the early 80s. No electricity, no running water. It was about 3 hours from my place, buried deep near the edge of a nature preserve that barely showed up on satellite maps. The guy who rented it out gave me the GPS coordinates and told me there'd be a dirt road marked with a red chain at the entrance. Past that, the cabin was another 2 miles in by truck or ATV. No cell service. That's exactly what I wanted. I packed light. A few days worth of food in a cooler, a cot and sleeping bag, a camp stove, tools, some drywood I picked up from a farm stand, a portable solar charger, a .45 handgun with a box of rounds, and some basic camping gear. Boone rode up front with me, head out the window most of the way. The red chain was right where the guy said it would be. I unhooked it, drove through, and hooked it back up behind me. The path was rough. Deep ruts from past trucks, narrow with overgrown branches slapping the sides of my vehicle as I inched forward. Boone stood up the whole time, ears perked. When the trees opened up, the cabin came into view. It was small, dark brown, with a metal roof that looked newer than everything else. There was a tiny porch on the front and a small chimney sticking out the top. A hand pump for water stood next to it, surrounded by old stones. A metal drum off to the side had half-burned trash inside. There were no other buildings, no outhouse, nothing. Just thick forest wrapping around it all like a blanket. I parked off to the side and let Boone out. He immediately ran around the clearing, sniffing every post, log, and patch of grass. I unloaded my gear and carried it inside. The inside smelled like pine and ash. The windows had shutters on the inside that bolted shut. A large iron stove sat in one corner, cold but still stained with soot. There was a table, 2 wooden chairs, and a bench with a thin cushion under the single window. I spent the first night relaxing, cooked a simple dinner on my stove, gave Boone his food, and lit a few candles inside. I sat on the porch for a while after dark, just listening. You don't realize how much constant noise you live around until you're somewhere truly silent. Out here, the silence had a weight. There were no passing cars, no distant hum of electricity. Just wind and small animals. Boone sat next to me, head on his paws, eyes open. By midnight, I was in my sleeping bag on the cot. Boone curled up at the foot of it. I fell asleep easily. The first full day was uneventful. I hiked around, took some photos, gathered wood from the forest, and boiled water for washing. Boone chased squirrels and rolled in leaves. That evening, I made a fire in the stove and read an old magazine I found in the cabin. It was so quiet, I could hear the mice scratching in the rafters above me. I didn't mind. I actually liked it. But on the second night, things started to feel off. It was just after midnight when Boone woke me up. He wasn't barking, but he was standing at the window with his head low and his body tense. His back legs were stiff, and his fur was standing up along his shoulders. He growled low and steady. I sat up quietly and listened. I heard nothing. The wind had stopped. I got up, walked to the window, and opened the shutter slowly. Nothing, just trees. Boone stayed at that window for almost an hour, ears turning at every little sound I couldn't hear. I kept the .45 next to me after that. The next day, I found boot prints. They were on the trail leading down to the creek about 200 yards from the cabin. I had walked that way the day before and didn't see them then. These were fresh. Clear heel-to-toe prints from a large man's boot. Wide tread. They were headed toward the cabin but didn't go all the way. They stopped maybe 50 feet from the clearing and turned back. That bothered me. A hunter wouldn't just stop and turn around like that, not without reason. And these woods weren't open to the public anyway. There were posted signs nailed to the trees for a mile in every direction. I walked Boone around the area, watching his body language closely. He sniffed around, tense and low, tail stiff. I could tell he smelled something he didn't like. That night, I locked the shutters and slid the table in front of the door. I kept the gun on the table beside me while I tried to sleep. Boone didn't sleep that night. He paced between the window and the door, stopping every few minutes to sniff under the crack where cold air came in. Just after 3 a.m., he growled again, this time louder, and stood rigid at the door. I got up, slid the table aside, and slowly opened the shutter on the door window. Someone was standing out there, maybe 15 feet from the porch. They weren't moving, just standing there. My brain locked up for a second. I could barely see the outline, but the shape was clear. A man. Heavy coat, broad shoulders, standing perfectly still. I froze. Boone let out one sharp bark and charged the door. The figure turned and vanished into the dark without a sound. No running, no crashing through brush. Just gone. I didn't sleep after that. I sat at the window with my gun in my lap until the sun came up. When I finally stepped outside, Boone ran straight to the spot where the man had stood and sniffed hard. He circled the area, then stopped and looked off into the woods. The grass was slightly pressed down, but there were no clear tracks this time. I packed up that morning, ready to leave. I threw everything into the truck and was just about to lock up the cabin when I saw something tucked into the corner of the porch. Something I knew hadn't been there before. It was a spent cigarette, crushed flat, with the end still slightly warm. I don't smoke. Nobody I know does either. I picked it up with a stick and dropped it into the fire drum. Boone was barking toward the trees again, his voice sharp and panicked. I didn't waste another second. We drove out fast, bouncing down the trail, mud spraying up along the sides of the truck. I kept checking the mirrors. At the red chain, I stopped long enough to hook it back and slammed the lock shut. We didn't go home right away. I pulled into a diner about an hour down the road just to get back near people. I sat there with Boone in the truck, windows cracked, drinking bad coffee and staring at the tree line beyond the parking lot. I called the man who rented the cabin to me the next morning and told him what happened. He didn't seem surprised. He said, "Yeah, some folks just like to roam." That was all he said before hanging up. I filed a report with the local sheriff's office later that week, but they didn't seem too interested. Said they'd send someone out to check, but I doubt they ever did. I never heard back. I still think about that man sometimes. The way he stood there, silent, watching, not moving. He knew I was in there. He knew I had a dog. He came anyway. He was probably watching for days before I even noticed. I don't think he wanted to rob me. I think he wanted something else, something worse. After that trip, I sold most of my camping gear. I kept the gun. And Boone sleeps inside now, always. It was the fall of 2017 when I decided to leave Houston behind for a while. I had saved enough from my job at a moving company, and after too many restless nights in a city that never really felt like mine, I needed something else. I was 29, tired, burnt out. I didn't want to talk to anyone. I didn't want advice. I just wanted to disappear for a bit. I bought a beat-up 1994 Chevy Silverado and packed it with old camping gear, a few tarps, some plywood, and basic tools. My plan was to head north and build a small cabin somewhere off-grid. Nothing fancy, just 4 walls and a roof, a dry place to sleep, somewhere quiet, somewhere nobody would find me unless I wanted them to. I drove for hours through the flat sprawl of East Texas, through Arkansas, and into southern Missouri. I don't know why I stopped there. Maybe it was the forests. Maybe it was the winding back roads that didn't show up on most maps. Maybe I just felt like I'd gone far enough. I found a patch of land deep in the Mark Twain National Forest. Public land, technically, but far enough from trails and roads that no one would bother me. The trees were dense, the underbrush thick, and the nearest road was almost a mile away. I parked the truck near a bend in an unmarked logging path, pulled on a heavy jacket, and started hauling my gear into the woods. The first day was quiet, damp. The smell of pine and wet leaves hung in the air. I cleared a patch of land about 20 feet by 20 feet and marked out where I'd lay the foundation. Nothing big, just enough space for me and my stuff. I didn't have a building plan or anything drawn up. I was going to figure it out as I went. By dusk, I had the first posts in the ground. The work was slow. Every swing of the hammer felt heavier than the last. But I was proud of what I'd started. That night, I slept under a tarp between two trees, wrapped in my sleeping bag, the wind pressing against the plastic like fingers. The next day it rained, hard. I could hear it coming before it hit, rolling in from the west like a wall. The trees swayed and hissed in the wind, and the sky turned the color of steel. I scrambled to cover my gear with tarps and stacked what plywood I had under a thick spruce. The dirt turned to soup. My boots sank 2 inches with every step. I spent most of that day hunched under a tarp, waiting it out. But by late afternoon, I couldn't sit still anymore. I decided to keep building. I had a poncho and gloves, and I figured I'd make some progress even if I was soaked. I didn't come all the way out here to sit on my ass. Hammering through the rain was miserable. My fingers were numb, and the wood was slippery. I built the floor frame and tried to level it with rocks and cut logs. It wasn't perfect, but it was good enough. I could feel the cold seeping into my bones, but I kept going. I didn't notice the truck at first. It was the sound that got me. An engine way off in the distance, muffled by the rain. I paused and listened. Faded, then came back, louder, then stopped. I stood still in the clearing, soaked, holding a hammer, and listened harder. The forest was quiet again, just the tapping of rain on leaves and the soft creak of branches in the wind. But something felt different, like the woods had gone too quiet. I told myself it was nothing, probably a logging truck or a hunter. Still, I kept glancing into the trees every few minutes, just to be sure. I worked faster, half from nerves, half from the cold. As night fell, I threw together a rough frame for the back wall. I leaned a few boards against it and tied a tarp over the top to keep it from collapsing. It wasn't much, but it was a start. At least it gave me one wall and some cover. I ate a cold can of beans for dinner, sitting on an overturned bucket under my makeshift roof. The rain had slowed to a steady drizzle, and I started to feel a little more relaxed. The hard part was over, I thought. Just needed to keep going. That night, I tried to sleep inside the frame. The tarp roof flapped above me, and the walls creaked in the wind. I had my sleeping bag laid out on a tarp over the floor frame, and I tucked a folded hoodie behind my head. The cold was sharp, but I was too tired to care. Sometime after midnight, I woke up. It wasn't the cold or the rain. It was something else. A sound. A crunch, faint but clear, like a footstep on wet leaves. I held my breath. Another crunch. Closer. I reached quietly for the small hatchet I kept beside my sleeping bag and sat up, heart pounding. My eyes adjusted slowly to the dark. The tarp roof blocked out most of the moonlight, but I could still see the trees through the gaps in the walls. Then, nothing. Just wind. Just rain. I stayed awake the rest of the night, listening. Every little sound made my skin crawl. I kept thinking, if someone's out there, they're just watching, waiting. When the sun came up, I climbed out and checked the area. I didn't see anything unusual at first, but then I noticed something that made my stomach drop.
Bootprints.
Not mine. These were deeper, wider. Someone had walked around the cabin in a full circle. I followed the trail for a few yards into the trees before it vanished into the mud and leaves. I didn't hear or see anyone all morning.
No tracks. No voices.
Just me, standing in the woods with a hammer and a knot in my gut. But I didn't leave. I didn't want to let fear push me out. I told myself it could have been a hiker or a hunter, someone who stumbled onto my sight and moved on. Still, I kept my hatchet closer that day. And every night after that, I built fast, maybe too fast. I just wanted walls around me. I didn't care about measurements anymore. I just wanted shelter, safety. I spent 2 more days putting up the rest of the frame, hammering through blisters and cuts. By the 3rd night, I had 4 walls and a better tarp roof tied tight with rope. That night, it poured again. I sat inside, dry for the first time in days, with my flashlight casting shadows against the wooden planks. I listened to the storm beat down around me and tried to ignore the fear that had settled in my chest like a stone. But I couldn't stop thinking about those boot prints, about the way they circled the cabin, about how they stopped 5 feet from where I'd been sleeping. I didn't sleep again that night. In the morning, I found something worse, a single muddy handprint on one of the walls. It was low, like someone had crouched down and pressed their hand against the wood. I stared at it for a long time. The print was smudged, but clear enough to know it didn't belong to me. My gloves had been on all day. This print was bare. I packed everything that morning, tossed tools into the truck, rolled up tarps, and didn't stop to eat. My hands shook the whole time. I didn't hear anything, didn't see anyone, but I felt watched. Every time I turned around, I expected to see someone standing behind me. I left the frame standing, drove back down the muddy path with branches scraping the sides of my truck. I didn't look back. I drove until I hit a gas station on the edge of a small town. I sat in the parking lot for a long time, engine off, staring at the dashboard. Rain still hit the windshield. My boots were caked in mud. My shirt stuck to my back. I never went back to the cabin, never told anyone about it. I kept thinking about what might have happened if I'd stayed one more night, if I hadn't noticed the prints, if I hadn't brought the hatchet. I didn't build another cabin after that. I stayed in motels for a while, eventually got a job in Kansas City, working nights at a warehouse. I still have the hatchet, still have the gloves, stained with mud and rain. Sometimes, when it rains hard, I wake up in the middle of the night and expect to hear footsteps outside my window. But there's nothing, just the storm, and the memory of a half-built cabin deep in the Missouri woods, where someone else was watching and waiting. It was the summer of 1999. I was 26 years old, and for the first time in my life, I found myself needing to be away from people for a while. I had just quit a long-term warehouse job in Pittsburgh after a bad fallout with my supervisor. I was mentally drained and angry all the time. One day, I packed up a small duffel bag, grabbed some gear, and drove out of the city without much of a plan. I didn't even tell anyone where I was going. I had an old map of western Pennsylvania tucked in the glove compartment. As I drove through small towns and empty roads, I circled areas that looked quiet and rural. That's when I found a small place called Gan Valley. It was about an hour north of Johnstown, quiet, barely a town, and surrounded by old forests and hills. On the map, I noticed a trail that led off the county road to a small structure marked Caretaker's Cabin, and next to it, an old cemetery that hadn't been used in decades. That was all I needed to know. I was looking for quiet, and a cabin by an abandoned graveyard sounded quiet enough. The gravel road leading up to the trail was rough. I had to park my car at a small clearing and walk the rest of the way. I carried a sleeping bag, a small cooler of food, bottled water, a flashlight, and a knife. I wore thick boots, a heavy flannel shirt, and a hat to keep the sun off me. The trail was narrow and barely maintained. Twigs and branches slapped my shoulders, and the ground sloped downhill for a while until I found a flat, moss-covered clearing. The cabin was there, hidden behind a row of thick trees and brush. It was old and gray, but not totally broken down. The roof was sagging in the middle, but it looked solid enough. A stone chimney stuck out of one side, and the door was hanging slightly off its hinges. The windows were boarded up from the inside. Someone had been there a long time ago, and I figured it was one of those state-owned spots that no one looked after anymore. About 20 yards from the back of the cabin was a graveyard. It wasn't the scary kind you see in movies, just a few tilted headstones sticking out of the earth, faded and chipped. The names were worn down by time, and most of the dates were from the late 1800s. Grass had overgrown the whole area.
No fence.
Just open land and some thin trees here and there. It was quiet except for the wind and birds. I decided I'd stay for a few days. Inside the cabin, the air smelled like dry wood and old dirt. There was a stone fireplace and a wooden cot with no mattress. A small table sat in the corner, covered in dust. I swept the floor using a branch and laid out my sleeping bag on the cot. I didn't bother locking the door since I didn't think anyone would come out here. No one had in years, probably. The first day was uneventful. I ate some food from the cooler, drank water, walked around the graveyard, and sat on a rock watching the sun go down. I felt calmer. No cars.
No voices.
No stress. Just air, trees, and silence. That night, I lit a small fire in the fireplace. It gave the place a little warmth and kept my nerves down. I heard some rustling outside, maybe a raccoon or a deer. It didn't worry me. That's normal out in the woods. The second day, I woke up stiff and sore. My back didn't like the wooden cot. I stretched and walked around the area again. That's when I noticed something odd. At the far edge of the graveyard, there was a grave I hadn't seen before. A flat stone buried under a thin layer of moss. The name on it was almost unreadable. I brushed it off with my boot. The letters were faint, but I made out the last name, Kessler. No date, no first name, just that. I thought maybe I just missed it the day before. That night, I had trouble sleeping. The wind picked up, and the sound of trees creaking kept me awake. I kept hearing a strange tapping sound against the back of the cabin. Not loud, just soft, irregular. I figured it was a tree branch hitting the wall. I ignored it for a while, but at some point, probably after midnight, I got tired of wondering. I stepped outside with my flashlight. There was no tree close enough to touch the cabin, and no wind strong enough to move a branch that far. I walked around the back. The tapping had stopped by then. I didn't see anything unusual, just weeds and the edges of the graveyard. I stood there for a long minute. Something didn't sit right. I felt exposed, like I was being watched, but I didn't see anyone. Eventually, I went back inside and stayed awake until the sun came up. On the third day, I thought about leaving. Something about the place was getting under my skin. Not ghosts or anything, just something I couldn't put a finger on. I told myself it was all in my head. I went for a long walk in the woods to clear my mind. I followed a deer path until I reached a small ridge. Looking down, I saw the whole valley stretch out beneath me. The trees were quiet. The graveyard was just a patch of gray in the distance, and the cabin looked small and harmless. I felt dumb for being so jumpy. When I got back, I found something that froze me in place. The grave I'd uncovered, the Kessler stone, was dug up. Not fully, but enough to notice. The dirt had been disturbed. Fresh dirt. A shovel had definitely been used. The earth was piled up near the headstone, and a small hole was left open. Not deep, maybe 2 feet, but that was enough. I looked around in all directions. No one was there. No tracks. No shovel lying around. That night, I didn't sleep. I stayed awake by the fireplace with the knife in my hand. I barely moved. Every noise outside made me tense. At one point, I thought I heard footsteps out near the graveyard, but it could have been an animal. Or maybe it wasn't. I didn't check. I couldn't bring myself to move. By the next morning, I had made up my mind to leave. But when I went outside, my cooler was gone. Not just moved, gone. It had been sitting on the porch, and now it wasn't. I searched the area for an hour. No signs of it. No wrappers, no trash, no animal prints. I walked back to the graveyard. The hole by the Kessler grave was now deeper, at least 4 feet. Still no shovel. Still no sign of who was doing it. I felt sick. This wasn't just weird anymore. Someone else was out there. I packed my stuff quickly and started walking back to where I had left my car. That's when I found the trail blocked. A tree had been dragged across the path, not fallen, dragged. It wasn't big, but it was fresh. The leaves were still green. I looked around for signs of someone. Nothing. No voices, no movement. I pulled the tree aside and kept going. When I reached the spot where I had parked, the car was still there, but something had been done to it. The passenger side window was shattered, and all the contents of my glove box were on the ground. The keys were still in my pocket. I started the car, turned on, but the gas gauge read empty. I knew for a fact I had a half tank when I left it. Someone had siphoned it. I didn't waste time. I drove slowly, praying I'd make it to a station. I rolled downhill when I could and kept it under 30. After about 20 minutes, I reached a town called Melbourne, where I filled the tank and sat in the parking lot of a diner trying to calm my nerves. I didn't tell anyone what happened. I just sat there, drank coffee, and drove back to Pittsburgh the next day. A week later, I couldn't stop thinking about the graveyard. I searched some old records at the public library, looking up anything on Gan Valley and the Kessler name. I found a single mention in a dusty land record from 1883. The Kessler family had owned a piece of land in that valley. A man named Roy Kessler had died suddenly, and the land was passed to a distant cousin. No details about the death. No burial location. Just a name and a note. Caretaker residence decommissioned in 1911. I never went back. Whoever was out there that week didn't want company. I wasn't supposed to be there, and they made that clear. It's been over 20 years now, and I still think about it sometimes. Not in a spooky way, more in a grounded, real-world fear kind of way. Someone had been living out there, maybe for years, and when I showed up, they waited and watched. They didn't yell or scare me off directly. They just started moving things, digging, removing supplies, cutting off exits, until I left on my own. And I did, because I realized too late that I was the trespasser. Not just on land, but in someone's life. I don't care who was buried in that grave. I don't want to know who was digging it. I'm just glad I left before they finished. I was 32 when I decided to take time off from work and head out into the woods of northern Idaho. It was October 2022, and I'd been stuck in an office for months, barely sleeping, barely breathing. I just wanted space, somewhere far from city noise, where I could think and maybe find whatever it was I'd been missing in my life. My name's Daniel Mason. I had no kids, no wife, just a small apartment in Spokane and a job in logistics that didn't mean anything to me anymore. I borrowed my cousin's old Chevy pickup, loaded it with gear, and took off toward Clearwater National Forest. I'd found a remote area on a topographic map, not too far from the Montana border. There was a fire road that cut close to a creek, and near that creek was a faded marking of a structure, an old ranger's cabin and used for years. That's where I planned to stay. I figured it would be empty, and if not, I'd just set up a tent nearby. It took me almost 9 hours of slow driving and backtracking to even reach the narrow dirt path that led to the place. The road was full of potholes and washed-out sections. I crossed over 2 wooden bridges that looked like they hadn't been inspected in decades. Eventually, I parked the truck off the trail, strapped on my pack, and walked the rest of the way in. The sun was low, casting long orange shadows across the trees. I followed a faint trail through the pines, the air cold enough that my breath showed. After about 2 miles, I saw the cabin. It was smaller than I expected. Just a 1-room wooden structure with a rusted tin roof and a short set of steps that sagged on one side. There was a thin metal chimney poking out the top. Moss climbed the walls. A few yards away, a half-buried stone fire pit sat between 2 logs. I checked the door. It was unlocked. Inside, the air was stale. Dust lay thick on the floor, and the smell reminded me of basements. Damp wood and old earth. The cabin had a cot against one wall, a busted table, and shelves holding cracked mason jars, an old tin coffee pot, and a rusted can opener. Someone had left behind a wool blanket, folded neatly on the cot. There were no signs anyone had been there recently. No footprints, no fresh food, no wrappers or trash. Felt forgotten. That's what I liked about it. I dropped my gear, unrolled my sleeping bag on the cot, and set up a small battery lantern. Outside, I gathered some wood from fallen branches and got a fire going in the pit before it got completely dark. The night fell fast, and with it came silence. Not city silence, but forest silence. Still and deep, like the trees themselves were holding their breath. I stayed up late that first night, just sitting by the fire, listening to the crackle of the wood and the distant calls of owls. I heard something larger in the distance, maybe a deer or elk, but nothing close. I drank a can of warm beer I'd brought and crawled into my bag around midnight. I didn't sleep well. The cot creaked every time I moved, and the wind blew through cracks in the cabin walls. At some point, around 2 or 3 a.m., I woke up to what sounded like footsteps outside. Not close, just off to the left, beyond the fire pit. They were slow, steady. Then they stopped. I stayed still, holding my breath, listening. Nothing moved after that. I told myself it was an animal, maybe a moose or a bear, even though the steps had sounded like boots on soft ground. I didn't sleep again until the sky turned light. The next morning, I looked around outside. No tracks. The fire had burned down to ash. I felt stupid for getting worked up, but I couldn't shake the unease. I kept my hunting knife on me the rest of the day, even while collecting wood and filtering creek water. I stayed around the cabin, reading, walking short trails, and jotting thoughts in a notebook. The quiet helped. I felt like I was finally clearing my head. But each night, around the same time, 2 or 3 a.m., I heard the same slow steps, always just out of sight, never closer than the fire pit, always stopping suddenly. The third night, I didn't sleep at all. I sat inside with the lantern off, looking out the small window, gripping the knife with both hands. I even nailed a few boards over the lower half of the window, just to feel a little safer. That night, I counted the steps. 11. Exactly 11, like someone walking just far enough to be heard, then standing still. On the 4th morning, I found something strange. In the dirt near the base of a tree, not far from the creek, was a narrow, shallow impression, like a toe dug into the ground, maybe someone shifting their weight. It was about the right shape and depth for a boot. No tread marks, just the front half. I walked a wide circle through the woods, looking for more, but found nothing else. No trash, no prints, no broken branches. I started thinking maybe someone was out there, another camper maybe, or someone hiding out. I kept telling myself if someone wanted to hurt me, they would have done it already. But that didn't help me sleep any better. I made a plan to leave the next morning. I'd pack everything and hike back to the truck before noon. But that night, my fifth night, everything changed. It rained. Not hard, but steady enough that I couldn't make a fire. I stayed inside the cabin, wrapped in the wool blanket, listening to the rain tap the roof. I just started to drift off when I heard it again. The steps, 11 of them, slow, measured. But this time they didn't stop. They came closer. I sat up fast, heart pounding. I reached for my knife. The rain made it hard to hear clearly, but the steps sounded different, like someone heavier.
Wet bootskissing in mud.
Then the sound of wood, one of the old stairs creaked under pressure. I got off the cot as quietly as I could, staying low. I turned off my lantern. A second stair creaked, then the porch floor, then nothing. I stayed frozen for what felt like an hour. Eventually, I heard the steps again, but this time going away. 11 again, fading into the trees. The rain covered everything else. In the morning, I opened the door slow, knife in hand. The rain had turned everything to mud, and that's when I saw them, boot prints, real ones, leading up to the cabin. White, deep, fresh. Whoever it was had stood right outside, maybe inches from the door. But here's what got me most. There were no prints leading in, only out, like they'd been standing there all night. I didn't eat. I didn't think. I just packed. By noon, I was hiking fast down the trail, through the wet underbrush, slipping on rocks, falling once hard on my side. I didn't care. I just wanted out. When I got back to the truck, there were marks on the windshield. 3 long streaks, like someone had dragged their fingers across the foggy glass. I drove the hell out of there. I reported it to the Forest Service, said I thought someone might be squatting out there or messing with hikers. They took my report but didn't seem concerned. The guy at the desk said there were folks who live rough out that way. Whatever that meant, I never went back. A week after I got home, I looked up the cabin's location again. I couldn't find it on any official maps, not even the old ones, but I remember exactly where it is. And I remember those steps. I think about that last night a lot. I think about what might have happened if I hadn't left the next morning. I try not to let my imagination get ahead of me, but sometimes, when I wake up in the middle of the night, I hear those 11 slow steps again. Only now they're inside my head. It was October 2017. I had just turned 30 and was going through a rough time in life. I quit my job a few months earlier after a bad falling out with my boss, and my girlfriend of 5 years had left me a few weeks after that. I didn't want to be in Minneapolis anymore. Every street reminded me of something. Every corner felt heavy. I needed to get away from the city, from people, from the noise in my own head. I booked a cabin online. It wasn't listed on any big travel site or anything. Just a basic, plain-looking website that had a few photos of an old wooden cabin deep in the woods of North Dakota, near Lake Medagosh. It looked isolated. Just trees, a dirt road, and the edge of a lake in the background. It was cheap too. Only $160 for 3 nights. That should have been a red flag, but I was more focused on getting away than worrying about details. I left early in the morning on a Thursday. The drive took about 7 hours with a few stops. It got more rural with each passing hour. Eventually, I was driving down long stretches of 2-lane roads with wheat fields and farms on both sides. The trees became thicker the further north I went. Cell service started dropping halfway through North Dakota. By the time I turned onto the gravel road that led to the cabin, I had no bars at all. The road to the cabin was narrow, like a forgotten trail. Grass was growing in the middle of the path, and the trees leaned in from both sides, creating a tunnel of branches. I had to drive slow. I was half expecting deer to jump out in front of me. I saw no houses, No other cars, just woods. When I finally reached the clearing where the cabin sat, the sun was already starting to go down. The cabin looked exactly like the photos, maybe a bit older. The wood was darkened and cracked from years of weather. The roof was slightly sagging in the middle. There was a small porch with 2 broken chairs and a table covered in leaves. A wooden dock stretched out into the lake nearby, though part of it looked warped. No boats, no canoes, just the still water and trees lining the shore on the other side. Inside, the cabin was simple. 1 main room with a small kitchen, a dining table, and a twin bed in the corner. There was a fireplace that looked like it hadn't been used in years. A door to a tiny bathroom with a cracked mirror and a rusty shower head. The floor creaked when I walked. The windows were dusty, but it was quiet. No car noises, no sirens, no neighbors. That's what I wanted. I unpacked a few things from my backpack. Some instant food, water bottles, a flashlight, and a thick book I'd been meaning to finish. There was no electricity, just a few candles and an old oil lantern. I didn't mind. I actually liked the idea of being completely off-grid. Felt like the world couldn't touch me here. That first night was uneventful. I lit a few candles, made some noodles on the portable gas stove, and read until I got tired. The bed was uncomfortable, and the wind outside made the cabin groan sometimes, but I managed to sleep. The second day started fine. I took a walk around the lake in the morning. The air was cold and smelled like pine. I didn't see anyone else, not even on the far side of the lake. The trail was rough and overgrown, but I liked how untouched it all felt. I skipped a few rocks, sat on a log for a while, then came back to the cabin and made some lunch. In the afternoon, I noticed something strange. I was out back, standing by the edge of the trees behind the cabin, just sort of stretching and looking around. That's when I saw a small pile of rocks about 20 feet into the woods. It looked like someone had carefully stacked them. 5 flat stones on top of each other, like a little tower. At first I thought maybe it was natural or something a kid might have built a long time ago. But then I noticed another pile, maybe 10 feet from the first. Then another further out. 3 in total, spaced apart but clearly aligned in a line that pointed toward the lake. I walked over to the first one and knelt down. The stones were fresh. No moss, no leaves caught between them. The dirt around them had been disturbed. I could tell someone had placed them there recently. I felt this weird tension in my chest, like I was being watched. But when I turned around, there was nothing but trees. I went back inside, trying not to overthink it. Maybe some other guest had built them before they left. Maybe it was nothing. That night, I had trouble sleeping. The wind had picked up, and I kept hearing strange creaks and soft thuds on the roof or the walls. Once, around 2 a.m., I heard a sound like footsteps outside, on the porch. Not heavy, more like someone slowly stepping on the old boards. I froze in bed and just listened. I didn't even dare grab the flashlight. The footsteps didn't last long, just a few seconds. Then nothing. I stayed awake until the sky started to brighten. In the morning, I checked the porch. No footprints, no sign of anyone. But when I looked toward the woods again, I noticed something. There was now a 4th rock pile, smaller than the others. It hadn't been there the day before. This one was closer to the cabin, maybe 12 feet from the tree line. It was aimed toward the cabin instead of the lake. That's when I really started feeling nervous. Someone had to be out there. Someone close enough to build these and move around without being seen. I packed some things into my backpack, just in case I needed to leave quickly, and kept it near the door. I didn't have cell service, and the cabin had no landline. If anything happened, I was on my own. I stayed inside most of that 3rd day. I read. I stared out the window. I kept looking toward the trees, expecting to see someone, but no one ever came out. The forest looked still, almost fake. I didn't make a fire that night. I didn't light the lantern. I sat in the dark, with the flashlight in my hand, listening. Just after midnight, I heard the sound again. Footsteps on the porch. This time it was slower, like someone pacing. I sat up in bed, heart pounding. The boards creaked once, then again, then silence. After a long stretch of nothing, I finally got the courage to move. I stood up, slowly walked to the window by the door, and peeked through the curtain. At first, I didn't see anything, just the dark porch. But then, just before I pulled away, I saw something shift. There was someone standing at the edge of the trees, not moving, just standing. It was hard to see clearly, but it looked like a man. Tall, skinny, wearing a dark hoodie or jacket. He was facing the cabin. I dropped the curtain and backed away. My legs felt weak. I grabbed my backpack, flashlight, and car keys. I stood there by the door for what felt like forever, heart racing, trying to decide if I should bolt for the car. But I didn't move, couldn't. I stayed awake the whole night, gripping the flashlight with white knuckles. I kept listening, but there were no more footsteps, no knocks, just the wind and the creaks of the cabin. When the sun came up, I walked outside. There were no footprints, nothing on the porch. But that man, I know I saw him. I checked the woods. The fourth rock pile was still there. But now there was a fifth, smaller, closer, maybe 6 feet from the porch steps. I didn't pack. I didn't clean up. I just got in my car and left. The gravel road seemed longer than I remembered. I kept checking my rearview mirror the entire time. No one followed. I drove all the way back to Minneapolis that day. I didn't stop. I didn't eat. I didn't answer texts. I didn't tell anyone for weeks. I tried emailing the guy who ran the cabin website. The email bounced back. The website was gone a few days later. Just disappeared. I don't know who was out there or what they wanted. I didn't see any cameras. No warnings. Just those rock piles and that figure in the trees. But here's what I think after all this time. Someone lives out there, or camps nearby. Someone who doesn't want to be seen. Maybe they like messing with people. Or maybe they're guarding something. The rocks weren't random. They were warnings, getting closer every day. I think if I had stayed one more night, the 6th pile would have been at the front door. I don't go into the woods anymore. I don't rent cabins. I sleep better in cities now, with noise, with lights, with people all around me. And I don't care how cheap it is. If it looks too quiet, too isolated, too forgotten, don't go. I was 36 when I decided to take a break from the city. I had been living in Milwaukee, Wisconsin most of my life, working in a warehouse job that paid well but drained everything out of me. My back, my knees, my head. Long hours and no sunlight for weeks in the winter made me feel older than I was. I needed time alone. Not just a weekend, but a good chunk of time, somewhere far from all the noise and people. I had some money saved up, and I told work I was taking an unpaid month off. No one cared much. I packed up my old Ford truck, grabbed a few weeks' worth of supplies, and drove west. A friend of my uncle's had a farm cabin out in Iowa, near a place called Lemony, just a couple miles from the Missouri border. It wasn't being used anymore. The main house on the farm had been empty since the owner, a man named Curtis, died 2 years earlier. His kids lived in Des Moines and didn't care about the place. The land had once been a full working farm, cattle, cornfields, a couple of barns. But now it was just empty acreage, overgrown fences, and a few rusting tractors. The cabin sat out near the back, right up against a patch of woods that curved around the western end of the property. I showed up in early October. It was already cold at night, and the days were shorter than I expected. The place looked run down, but still solid. The cabin had a pitched metal roof, a single chimney, and weather-worn cedar siding that had turned gray with age. It had one room, a fireplace, an old iron stove, and a cot. No running water, no power. There was a hand pump out front and an outhouse about 20 yards away through some brush. That was fine with me. I didn't come out here to be comfortable. I wanted quiet. The first couple of days were peaceful. I spent the mornings walking the property, sometimes going down to the old pond past the hayfield. It was mostly dried up, just a shallow basin now, surrounded by reeds. There were old deer trails and some signs of raccoons. I found an old fence line that had completely fallen over. Everything smelled like soil, rot, and dry grass. I had brought plenty of canned food and a small propane stove. I cooked simple stuff, beans, rice, oatmeal. Nights were cold. I'd sit by the fire and write in a small notebook, even though I wasn't much of a writer. Sometimes I'd just sit and listen. It was so quiet it almost buzzed in my ears. The sound of trees, wind pushing through dry leaves, maybe a distant coyote. It was around the fourth night that I started noticing small things. Nothing big, just off. The first thing I saw was a light, like a flicker. It was after midnight. I had gone outside to pee and noticed something out past the tree line. It was deep in the woods, far enough I couldn't see what it was, but it didn't look like firelight. More like a flashlight flickering once and going out. It didn't come back. I figured maybe it was a hunter or someone passing through. The next morning, I walked down toward the woods where I thought I saw the light. I didn't find anything, just deer tracks and a couple old beer cans. The trees there were thicker than I realized. It looked like part of the woods had once been logged a long time ago and had grown back all tangled. I didn't go far. It was easy to lose your way back there. That afternoon, I fixed a loose board in the cabin's floor and gathered some dead wood for the fire. I kept telling myself I was overthinking the light. But that night, the weird feeling came back. Around 2 a.m., I was awake, lying in the cot, half covered with my sleeping bag. The fire was low but still giving off a bit of light. I started hearing something outside. Not animals, not wind. This was a thudding sound, soft but regular, like footsteps, heavy ones, crunching the gravel out front. I lay still for almost a full minute, just listening. It got closer. I grabbed my knife from the floor and crept up to the window. There was no glass, just an old shutter I could slide open a crack. I couldn't see anything, but the footsteps stopped right near the porch. I held my breath. It was dead quiet now. After a long pause, I heard the sound again, but this time it was walking away. Crunch, 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 then nothing. I stayed up until sunrise, fire going again, just staring at the door. I didn't go out until I could see clearly. When I finally stepped outside, I found footprints. Not boot prints, bare feet. Someone had walked up to my cabin barefoot. The prints were large, bigger than mine, and deep, like the person was heavy or carrying something. They led up to the porch, paused, and then turned back toward the woods. That was the moment I knew someone was watching the cabin. I debated leaving that day, but I felt like it would be a waste. I told myself it was probably a squatter or someone from nearby land screwing around. I made a point of keeping my knife on me at all times. That afternoon, I hiked back toward the woods, following the prints as far as I could. They got lost quickly in the tall grass, but I did find something strange deeper in. I came across a small pile of animal bones arranged in a neat little circle. All small stuff, rabbits, squirrels, maybe a possum. Some were fresh, some were old and white. In the center of the circle was a flat stone. Nothing was on it, but it looked like it had been used for something. I didn't touch it. I walked straight back to the cabin, heart racing the whole way. That night, I didn't sleep. I sat with my back against the wall, facing the door. I didn't light a fire. I figured I'd try to stay quiet and see if whoever it was came back. At around 3 a.m., I heard it again. Footsteps. But this time, they came around the side of the cabin. I heard something scrape against the back wall. Then I heard the pump outside, Just one creak, like someone was testing it. Then silence. I waited another hour before opening the door, knife ready. There was no one. The air was cold and still. I circled the cabin. On the back wall, about chest height, was a fresh scrape through the wood, like someone had dragged something metal across it. I didn't go back inside. I stood outside until sunrise. The next morning, I packed up most of my stuff. I didn't leave yet, but I moved everything important into the truck and parked it facing out toward the road. I had this crawling sense that if I didn't prepare now, I might not get the chance. For the next 2 days, nothing happened. No prints, no footsteps, nothing around the woods. I started to think maybe I'd scared whoever it was off. But on the third night, I woke up to a new sound. Not footsteps. This was worse. It was a dragging noise. Something being pulled through the gravel around the cabin. I froze in the cot, holding my knife so tight my hand hurt. I could hear the thing circling the cabin. It dragged for a while, then stopped. Then footsteps again. Heavy ones. They came right up to the door. I held my breath. I could see the fire had burned down to red coals, barely glowing. Then something touched the door. Just a single tap. Then again. Then it scraped down the wood, slowly. Kept doing that for almost 10 minutes. Scrape, tap, scrape, then silence. At some point, I must have passed out from fear or exhaustion. I woke up when it was already daylight. I opened the door and saw the same bare footprints in the dirt. But this time, there was something else. Right in front of the door was a dead raccoon. Its neck had been twisted all the way around. Its belly had been cut open, and its insides were gone. That was it for me. I threw everything in the truck and drove. I didn't care if I left stuff behind. I didn't even lock the cabin. I just got out of there. On my way out, I passed a county sheriff's car parked near a ditch about a mile down the road. I stopped and told the deputy I'd been staying at the old Wilson farm and someone had been stalking the place. He looked at me like he'd heard that story before. He didn't write anything down, just told me there were no houses for 10 miles in any direction and said to stay out of them woods. I never went back. A month later, I got a call from my uncle saying the family who owned the farm had finally sold it to a company. I didn't ask who. I didn't care. To this day, I don't know who or what was watching me out there. But it wasn't a ghost or anything like that. It was a person. Someone who lived in those woods. Someone who didn't want me there. Maybe someone who'd been living off that land a long time. Maybe someone who didn't follow the same rules the rest of us do. I've camped since then, but never alone, and never near the woods. Not after that. It was late September 2016 when I decided to take a break from everything and drive up to Northumberland for a week. I was 29 then, living in Newcastle, doing freelance web design jobs from my flat, and feeling burnt out. My mother had just moved to Spain. My sister was busy raising her twins, and I hadn't had a proper holiday in over a year. I'd been scrolling online for remote cabin rentals when I found this one, tucked between the moors and an old forest area, just south of the Cheviot Hills. The listing didn't say much, just a single photo of a weathered wooden cabin and a short description about being off-grid, surrounded by heather and pines, and ideal for solitude. That was exactly what I wanted. Something far away, quiet, no phone signal, no people, just space to think and breathe. I booked 5 nights. The drive up took about 3 hours. I had printed out directions since I didn't expect phone signal up there, and by the time I left the main road and started down a rough gravel path that wound through thick woods, it already felt like I was far away from everything familiar. That road seemed to go on forever, climbing slightly and weaving past mossy trees and muddy ditches. The sky was gray and flat, the way it often is in the north that time of year, and the air smelled cold and damp. The cabin came into view just after a narrow bend. It sat on a small clearing, slightly sunken, surrounded by tall grass and scattered boulders. Heather and bracken grew thick around the edges. Beyond it, a row of leaning pine trees formed a sort of natural barrier, their tops bending in the wind. It was smaller than I expected, just one room and a tin chimney poking out the side. The wood was aged to a silvery gray, and the roof sagged slightly in the middle. There was a small porch with a single old chair, and next to it, a crooked wooden fence marked the edge of a drop-off where the land dipped into a wide slope of moorland. No other buildings in sight.
No lights.
Nothing. I parked beside the fence, got out, and stood for a long moment listening. It was completely quiet. Not a car, not a voice, just the wind moving through the trees. Inside, the place was bare bones. A small iron stove in one corner, a narrow bed against the wall, a few shelves with some canned food and a rusted kettle. No electricity, of course. Just a lantern hanging from a hook and a few half-burnt candles on the window ledge. There was a compost toilet out back, past a path of flat stones that were half buried in moss. It was exactly what I'd wanted. I settled in that first evening without much thought. Made a fire, ate a cold sandwich, and read a paperback I'd brought along. I went to bed early and slept like a stone. I think the drive and the fresh air knocked me out. The second day, I woke up just before sunrise. It was colder than I expected. My breath came out in mist and the stove had gone out sometime in the night. I got it going again and boiled water for coffee, wrapped in 2 jumpers and still shivering a bit. That morning, I decided to go for a walk and get a feel for the area. I followed a path down behind the cabin, through the pines and into the open moor. There were no proper trails, just faint deer tracks and dry patches where the heather was flattened. It felt untouched, wild, the kind of place no one had been in years. After a mile or so, I found an old stone wall, half collapsed, and what looked like the remains of a sheep enclosure. I took some photos and sat for a bit before heading back. That's when I saw her. At first, I didn't even realize what I was looking at. Just a figure in the distance, standing still among the heather, far off to my right. She was a good 200 or 300 yards away, dressed in dark clothes, maybe a long coat or cloak, and her hair was long, black or very dark brown and loose. I thought maybe she was a hiker or maybe someone from a nearby farmhouse, though I hadn't seen any houses nearby. She didn't move, just stood there, facing my direction. I waved, a small gesture, but she didn't wave back, didn't react at all. I turned away and kept walking. When I looked back again a few seconds later, she was gone. I told myself maybe I'd imagined her. Maybe it had just been the light, a dark patch of heather or a tree stump, but it didn't sit right with me. I spent the rest of the afternoon inside, reading. I kept glancing out the window, half expecting to see her outside, standing in the clearing, but nothing happened. No one came. The wind picked up and rattled the door a few times, but that was it. That night I had trouble sleeping, not because of any noise, but because I couldn't get the image of her out of my head. That stillness, that long, dark shape against the pale moor. Something about the way she hadn't reacted, hadn't moved. It was strange. The third day it rained. I stayed in most of the day, only going out to the toilet and back. The ground had turned to sludge and the wind never really stopped. In the late afternoon, I was slicing some bread when I heard something from outside. Just a short sound like a twig snapping. Close, not more than a few meters from the cabin. I stood still for a long time. Came again. A light crunch. Footsteps. I moved to the window and looked out. No one, but the wind had changed. It had that soundless pressure to it, like it was holding something back. And the trees were moving differently now, like they were being brushed from underneath, not just the wind pushing them. Later that evening, I found something strange. I'd stacked some firewood on the porch when I first arrived, enough to last me a few days. That evening, one of the larger logs was lying out in the grass, a few feet from the porch, too far to have rolled. No signs of an animal, no obvious reason it would be there. I didn't go outside again that night. The next morning, everything felt off. The air smelled wrong, like wet hair or something stale, and the ground around the cabin had fresh prints in it. Not boots, not animals, bare feet, narrow, long toes. They circled around the cabin in a wide loop, came up near the back door, and vanished toward the trees. I felt sick. I packed up my things and decided to leave a day early. I didn't care about the money. I just wanted out. But the road was worse than before. The rain had made it thick with mud, and my car couldn't get traction. The tires spun uselessly. I tried 3 times before I gave up and reversed back to the clearing. I figured I'd wait a few hours, let the ground dry, and try again later. Around midday, I heard a noise from inside the chimney, a dragging, scraping sound, not like birds or wind, slower, heavier. I lit the fire anyway, hoping it would drive whatever it was back out. The smoke poured up the flue and the noise stopped. That evening, just before dusk, I saw her again. She was standing just past the fence, near the tree line. Same dark clothes, same hair, same posture. Still, watching. I stood frozen, halfway through putting on my boots. She didn't move, just stood there like she was waiting. I stayed inside. She came closer after dark. I didn't see her, but I heard the boards creak on the porch. Very slow, very careful. I'd left a tin mug out there by accident, and at one point I heard it clatter across the floor like it had been kicked. I sat on the floor with a hatchet in one hand and a flashlight in the other, staring at the door for hours. Nothing came in. When it was light enough to see the next morning, I opened the door. The mug was lying in the grass. The wood pile was scattered, and something had been dragged across the side of the cabin wall for long parallel marks. Not scratches exactly, just grooves, like someone had run their fingers through the damp wood. I got the car to move around noon. The ground had dried just enough. I didn't even go back inside. I just took the keys, threw my bag in the back seat, and drove. The entire way down that winding road, I kept expecting to see her standing there, waiting around a bend, or walking along the side of the trees. But I didn't. I got back to Newcastle late that night, parked the car, sat on the edge of my bed in the dark for a long time. I didn't sleep. A week later, I contacted the rental site to leave a review and warn people, but the listing was gone, deleted.
No trace.
I tried reverse image searches on the photo, tried contacting the owner's email address, but nothing came back. I haven't found that cabin since. I told myself for a long time that it was just some strange woman, maybe a squatter or a local with mental health issues. Maybe she lived in the woods and didn't like people near her land. Maybe she was harmless. But the part that I still think about years later is her face. I never saw it. Not once. Not when she stood in the open moor. Not when she was at the fence. Not even when I heard her on the porch. She always turned just slightly away, just enough to keep it hidden. And for some reason, that makes it worse. I haven't been back to the countryside since, and I don't think I ever will. It was late summer of 2013. I had just turned 31 that spring, and life in Salt Lake City was starting to wear on me. I'd been working a desk job for nearly a decade and hadn't taken a proper break in years. My apartment was small and boxed in by buildings. I couldn't see anything from my window except a gray parking garage and the blinking lights of a used car dealership across the street. It felt like the city had been slowly closing in on me. So when I got an email from my cousin Dave, saying he had found a cheap listing for a week-long cabin rental out near Escalante. I said yes without even thinking. He wasn't coming with me. He just forwarded the listing because he knew I'd been talking about needing time alone. The listing was vague. Just one picture of a log cabin, said to be off-grid, perfect for disconnecting. It didn't give exact coordinates. It only said it was near a trail called Deer Hollow, about 12 miles off Highway 12. There was no phone number, just a PayPal link, a name I didn't recognize, and a brief instruction. Asterisk, you'll see the sign at the fork. Go right at the deer skull. Asterisk, it should have been a red flag, but I was tired, burnt out, and too careless to think twice. I paid for the week and left the city 3 days later in my old Tacoma. The drive was long and quiet. Once I got past Bryce Canyon, the roads thinned out. No cars in either direction, just yellow hills and pine clusters. I didn't even get radio reception after a while. I had printed the instructions from the email and taped them to my dash. When I finally spotted the fork in the road, there was indeed a post stuck in the ground with a sun-bleached deer skull on top, missing one antler. I turned right and followed a narrow dirt road through the trees. It took me another 20 minutes before I saw the cabin. I nearly missed it. The place was set back behind a line of thick pines. The road curved and dipped in places, and my truck jolted hard when I hit a rock I didn't see. The cabin didn't look anything like the photo in the listing. It was much older. Some of the logs were warped, and the roof had patches of rust-colored moss growing on it. There was no gravel parking spot, just a clearing with matted grass and dried pine needles. I shut the truck off and sat there for a minute. It was dead quiet.
No birds.
No wind, just heat. When I stepped out, the air smelled dry and old, like dust and rotting bark. I took my backpack from the passenger seat and locked the truck out of habit, even though there wasn't another person for miles. The front door to the cabin had no knob, just a wooden latch with a nail jammed through it to keep it shut. Inside, it was dark and musty. The only light came through one small window with a torn mesh screen. There was no furniture, just a cot frame in the corner and a small wooden counter with a dented metal basin. A shelf along the wall held a few rusted cans of food, beans, corn, something unlabeled, and an old oil lamp with no oil in it. No running water, no electricity, just silence and that heavy, stale smell. I should have left, but I didn't. I stayed that first night inside, lying on the cot frame with my sleeping bag stretched across it. I kept the front door open just a little to let in air, but that only let in more bugs. Something about the place felt wrong, but I couldn't put my finger on it. It wasn't fear, not exactly, just a strange tension in the air, like the place was holding its breath. I told myself I was just adjusting, that it was normal to feel weird sleeping alone in the middle of nowhere. The second day, I spent most of it exploring the area. The trail behind the cabin led down into a shallow ravine, dry and cracked from the heat. I walked for an hour and never saw anything man-made. No tire tracks.
No campsites.
Not even any real wildlife. Just dry shrubs and rocks. At one point, I thought I heard something up in the trees behind me, like sticks snapping in fast rhythm. But when I stopped to listen, there was nothing. That night, I couldn't sleep. I had the door shut and latched, but I kept hearing things outside. Not animals, at least not normal ones. The sounds weren't loud, just soft, quick movements, like something brushing lightly against the side of the cabin. I held still and listened for hours, clutching the flashlight I kept by my head. I didn't dare turn it on. I just stared up into the dark ceiling and waited for morning. On the third day, I found the trail again and followed it deeper. I didn't know why. Part of me wanted to prove that I could handle it, that it was just my head playing tricks. After about 2 miles, I saw a strange patch of ground, flat, smooth, and lighter in color than everything around it. It looked like the foundation of something long gone. There were square stones set into the earth, half buried. I crouched down and wiped the dirt off one, and there were markings on it. Not words, just lines and scratches. Behind the foundation, there was a short ridge of boulders. I climbed up to get a better view and nearly lost my balance. The wind up there was sharp, and I felt this strange urge to duck, like I was being watched from behind. I looked back toward the trees, but there was nothing. Still, the feeling wouldn't go away. On the way back to the cabin, I took a different route. I wasn't sure why, but I didn't want to pass that stone foundation again. I made it back around dusk and found something odd right away. A line of small stones had been placed across the front step. They weren't there before. I was sure of it. They were small and round, each one evenly spaced, going right across the width of the door. I stepped over them, unlocked the latch, and went inside. Nothing looked touched, but the air inside was colder than outside, which didn't make sense. I unrolled my sleeping bag again, but I didn't get in it. I stayed sitting up most of the night with my flashlight on, listening. Day 4 was the worst. I woke up to find the small stones gone. Instead, right in the dirt in front of the step, someone or something had drawn a circle. Not just a rough one. It was almost perfect, maybe 5 feet across, and pressed into the dirt with a stick or a bone. Inside the circle was a single rock, upright like a little marker. That did it. I was done. I went inside, stuffed everything back into my pack, and stormed out. But when I turned the key in the truck's ignition, nothing happened. Not even a click. Battery was fine. Lights worked. I opened the hood, but I didn't know what I was looking for. I just stared at the engine like it would fix itself. I tried again. Nothing. I looked back toward the woods and felt that same tight feeling in my chest, like someone was watching me. I couldn't explain it. I grabbed my pack and started walking down the road, figuring I'd eventually hit the fork again and get back to the highway. Maybe flag someone down. But after walking for nearly an hour, the road curved in a way I didn't recognize. The trees didn't look right. I kept going, hoping it would open up, but it didn't. Eventually, I gave up and turned back. When I got back to where I thought the cabin should be, it wasn't there. I walked up and down that stretch 3 times. I recognized the trees, the mossy stump, the bend in the trail, but the cabin wasn't there anymore. It was gone. I don't remember exactly how long I wandered after that. Maybe 4 hours. Felt like longer. My legs were scratched up, my lips dry. I finally found the cabin again just before sunset. It was exactly where it had always been, but I swear it hadn't been there when I passed the first time. I stepped up slowly. The circle in the dirt was gone now.
No rocks. No marks.
I went inside, locked the door, and sat with my back against it. I didn't eat that night. I didn't sleep either. I just sat there with the flashlight in my hand, waiting for the light outside to come back. The next morning, I tried the truck again. It started on the first turn. I didn't even question it. I drove out of there without packing anything. Left the sleeping bag, my cooler, even my water jug. I didn't look back. I kept driving until I hit pavement, then cell service, then the first gas station I could find. I sat in the lot for a full 20 minutes, just breathing. The cashier came out to ask if I needed help. I told him no. When I got back to Salt Lake, I looked up the listing online. It was gone. The email address I used to pay, deleted. No trace of it. I even tried to find records of any cabins off Deer Hollow Trail near Escalante. Nothing came up. It's been years now. I don't talk about it much, but I haven't been back out to the woods since. I don't hike. I don't camp. I don't even drive past that part of the state if I can help it. Because the one thing that still gets to me, more than the stones, more than the circle, more than the disappearing cabin, is this: when I got back to the truck that last morning, the passenger door was open, and I never opened it. It was late October 2019 when I decided to head out to a small hunting cabin deep in the Wyoming backcountry, about an hour from a town called Riverton. I was 32 at the time, single, no kids, and I had been working construction jobs on and off throughout the year. After a few months of nonstop work, I had built up some savings and decided to take a break and do something for myself. I used to go hunting with my uncle when I was younger, and I figured some time out in the woods might do me good. Quiet, no people, just me and the land. That was the idea. I'd heard from a coworker about a small off-grid hunting cabin his cousin owned, tucked about 20 miles into the mountains north of Riverton, not far from some dense forest near the Wind River Range. The place didn't have electricity, but it had a wood stove, a well nearby, and enough space for 1 or 2 people to crash for a few days. He said it hadn't been used in over a year, but it was dry, secure, and I could use it for free if I brought my own gear. That sounded perfect. I packed up my truck with all the essentials: sleeping bag, a basic propane stove, some canned food, water jugs, hunting gear, first aid kit, firewood, everything I thought I'd need. I even packed a spare tire and a full gas can just in case. The drive up was mostly fine until the last stretch, which turned into a bumpy dirt road for a good 15 miles. Trees got thicker, road got narrower, and by the time I reached the cabin, I could feel how far I was from everything. I had no cell service at all. The cabin sat on a small clearing surrounded by tall pines, with the slope of the land falling off into deeper woods beyond. It looked beat up but intact. Weather-worn logs, a tin roof with some rust, a small porch with steps that creaked under my boots. There were old animal skulls nailed to the wood above the doorway, probably for luck or tradition, I don't know. I unlocked the door using the key left in a metal box under the porch and stepped inside. The air was stale, a mix of dust and wood. There were 2 cots against the walls, a table, some shelves, and a wood stove in the corner. Mice had probably lived in here off and on, judging by the droppings in a corner. I aired the place out by cracking the small window and leaving the door open while I cleaned. It took a few hours to get it feeling like somewhere I could sleep in. That first night, I didn't do much. Just heated up a can of chili, got the fire going in the stove, and sat outside on the porch with a headlamp and a camp chair. I didn't see anything, just darkness and silence. No breeze, no birds, not even the sound of insects. Felt like the woods were holding their breath. The next morning, I hiked out early. I had brought my bolt-action .308 and some decent optics. The plan was to work my way through the forest to the west of the cabin, where the land dropped into a shallow valley. I followed some faint game trails and found signs of elk and mule deer, scat, hoof prints, broken branches. I took my time, moving slow, careful, staying downwind. Around midday, I spotted a decent-sized buck about 100 yards out. Took a clean shot and dropped it where it stood. I gutted it there, packed what I could in my frame pack, and hiked the meat back to the cabin. It was a long, heavy walk. I stashed what I could in a cooler with ice packs, though I knew it wouldn't last more than a couple days out here. I figured I'd finish up the trip and leave before it spoiled. That night, I sat by the stove with the fire going strong, tired but content. I thought about staying longer, maybe try for elk the next day, maybe clean up the place a little. I had no plans back home and nowhere to be, but something changed on the 3rd day. I'd woken up before dawn. I made some instant coffee on the propane burner, grabbed my rifle and gear, and set out again, this time going farther south of the cabin into terrain I hadn't explored yet. I hiked until about noon, didn't see anything worth chasing, and then turned back. That's when I noticed something off about the trail. There were boot prints, not mine. I was sure of that. The treads were different, wider, and they were fresh, pressed into mud that had softened from a drizzle overnight. I hadn't seen anyone out here, hadn't heard a single truck or ATV since I arrived. I felt a twinge of unease, but figured maybe it was an old hunter. Maybe someone knew about the cabin and used it sometimes. Still, I didn't like the idea of someone being out here without making themselves known. When I got back to the cabin, I checked the area. I walked around the perimeter, rifle in hand. Nothing looked disturbed. Door still locked. No signs of tracks around the porch. I told myself maybe I was just being jumpy. But that night, I couldn't sleep. I kept hearing sounds in the woods. Not animals. Footsteps. Crunching. Stopping. Starting again. Then silence. It was just loud enough to notice and just irregular enough to keep me guessing. I stayed up by the fire, rifle in my lap, ears straining, heart thudding. By morning, I was done pretending it was nothing. I packed up what I could and stashed it in the truck. I didn't want to panic, but I didn't want to be careless either. I planned to go out one more time, just a short hike, and then head out by afternoon. I stayed close to the cabin that day within a half-mile loop. I didn't see much. Some squirrels, a few distant birds, no deer. But again, I saw boot prints. This time, they were near the stream where I filled my water jugs. And they were fresh. The mud hadn't dried yet. Whoever it was, they were watching me, not just passing through. They weren't dumb either. No trash, no talking, no sign of fire or light. That meant they were experienced. Hunters, maybe, or worse. That night, I locked the cabin from inside and barred the door with a heavy chair and my cooler. I didn't sleep. I sat in the corner with my rifle across my knees and my knife beside me. Every little noise outside felt louder. The crack of a branch, the rustle of something brushing against the wall. Once, just past midnight, I swear I heard breathing. Not animal breathing, human, slow, controlled, right on the other side of the wall. When the sun came up, I didn't waste time. I grabbed everything and loaded up my truck in under 5 minutes. I got the engine started, and as I backed out of the clearing, I saw movement in the tree-line. Far off but not far enough. Person, standing still, just watching. I couldn't make out details, but I knew it wasn't my imagination. I drove fast down the dirt road, bouncing over rocks and ruts. When I finally hit the highway, I didn't stop until I reached Riverton. I filled the tank, grabbed food, and stayed at a motel that night with the blinds shut tight. I never went back to that cabin. I told my coworker to tell his cousin someone was out there. Someone dangerous. He said the cousin sold the land a few months later. I never got details. Even now, when I go hunting, I stay on public land. Areas with people, trails, campsites. I don't go too deep anymore, and I never sleep far from my truck. I don't care how tough you think you are. There's nothing brave about being watched in the woods by someone who knows how to stay hidden. I wasn't scared of animals. I was scared of what people are capable of when they want to stay off the grid, when they want to live out there unseen. Whoever was out there near that cabin, they didn't want company. And I was lucky they let me leave, because some people disappear in places like that, and no one ever finds them.